All right, welcome to The Explainer, where we break down these huge, complex topics into something you can really sink your teeth into. Today, we are diving into one of the most influential and, one of the most controversial thinkers of all time, Karl Marx.
But before we get to the ism, to Marxism, we've got to understand the man. I mean, how does a guy go from writing romantic poetry to sparking revolutions all over the globe? That's the real story, right? Let's find out how his ideas were forged in a world that was basically on fire.
So, to really get what Marx was all about, we need to go back in time. We're heading to the early 19th century, a time when Europe was being completely and often violently remade.
So you've got this collision of two gigantic forces. On one side, you have the French Revolution, this political earthquake that's sending shockwaves of liberty and new ideas across all of Europe. And on the other, you've got the Industrial Revolution, which is creating brand new cities, incredible wealth, but also this huge, impoverished new working class. This tension is the entire backdrop for everything that comes next.
Now, Marx wasn't the first person to look around and say, hey, this is messed up. Radical ideas were already in the air. You had these thinkers, people we now call the utopian socialists, who were dreaming up these perfect little cooperative communities to escape the horrors of industrial life. But let's be real, they were mostly just dreams. Something much harder, much more confrontational, was right around the corner.
Okay, so let's zoom in on the man himself, born right in the middle of this historical pressure cooker of revolutionary change and industrial strife.
You know, Marx's own hometown was basically a perfect storm of these conflicting ideas. Trier had been French, so it was soaked in all that liberal, revolutionary spirit. But then, bam, after Napoleon loses, it gets handed over to Prussia, which was super rigid, super autocratic. Imagine growing up with that tension in the air. It's bound to shape how you see the world.
And wow, people noticed how brilliant he was right from the start. We're talking about a guy in his 20s, and other radicals were just in awe. This one socialist, Moses Hess, basically called him an intellectual superhero, saying he was like Rousseau, Voltaire, and Hegel all rolled into one. He was convinced Marx was the guy who would finally tear down the old world.
But here's the thing that gets lost, the side of Marx nobody talks about. Before all the politics, he was this intense, romantic poet. Seriously, he wrote whole albums of poetry for his future wife, Jenny von Westphalen. And it wasn't light stuff either. Listen to this line. Thus heaven I forfeited, my soul is chosen for hell. I mean, wow, that's a young man already grappling with some huge ideas about destiny and rebellion.
Yeah, that rebellious spirit was way too big to stay in poetry. He jumps into journalism, and his articles are so radical that he instantly becomes an enemy of the Prussian state. This kicks off a journey, really a life on the run, that's going to forge everything he believes.
Just look at this path. The guy was literally chased across Europe, kicked out of Prussia, then kicked out of France at Prussia's request, then kicked out of Belgium. He eventually has to give up his citizenship altogether. He becomes a man with no country. And you have to think, that experience completely changes you. It's no wonder that for Marx, what class you belong to became way more important than what country you were from.
It's during this time, while he's basically a political refugee, that he meets the most important person in his life, Friedrich Engels. And the irony here is just incredible. Engels is the son of a super wealthy factory owner, right? But he uses his insider access to document the absolutely brutal, horrific conditions inside those factories. He didn't just give Marx ideas, he gave him the hard data, the proof. And let's be honest, he also gave him the money to keep the lights on and keep writing.
So the two of them get together and they cook up this massive, world-changing idea. They look at history and say, you know what? This isn't about great kings or glorious nations. It's simpler. It's all about class struggle. In their time, that was the big fight. The bourgeoisie, the people who owned all the stuff, the factories, the machines, versus the proletariat, the working class, who had nothing to sell but their own two hands. And for them, this wasn't just some random conflict. It was the engine of history, and it was headed for one place and one place only: revolution.
And you won't believe the timing. Just as they're putting the final words on their most famous pamphlet, it happens. The revolution they predicted wasn't a theory anymore. In 1848, it exploded into reality, all across Europe.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. 1848. We're not talking about one little uprising. We're talking about a wave of revolutions that swept through more than 10 countries at once. It must have felt like the entire old world was about to come crashing down.
So what caused this massive explosion? Well, it was a perfect storm, really. You had a huge food crisis, people were literally starving. Then a massive economic crash, so people were losing their jobs. And into all that desperation, you pour this cocktail of incredible, powerful new ideas: liberalism, nationalism, and this new radical socialism. People were hungry, they were angry, and they were armed with a vision for a totally different world.
And right into the middle of this blazing inferno drops the Communist Manifesto. Seriously, the timing is just mind-blowing. It's published in February 1848, right as the barricades are going up in the streets from Paris to Budapest. This little book suddenly gave all that chaos a voice, a name, and a chilling promise to the powers that be.
And at first, it looked like it was working. They called it the springtime of peoples. Kings were toppled, constitutions were written, the old guard was on the run. It was incredible. But that spring didn't last. The problem was the revolutionaries themselves couldn't agree. The middle-class liberals, they wanted a constitution, sure, but they were absolutely terrified of the radical workers who wanted to upend the whole system. And that division, it was fatal. It gave the old aristocracy the opening they needed to regroup, fight back, and brutally crush the revolts.
But the failure of 1848 didn't snuff out socialism. Not at all. It just fractured it. It revealed this deep, fundamental crack in the movement. And it set up a huge debate that honestly is still going on today.
In that central conflict really came to a head in London, at a meeting called the First International. This was a big deal, all these radical groups from across Europe coming together. And it became the stage for a showdown between the two giants of the movement, Karl Marx and his biggest rival, the Russian anarchist Mikhail Bakunin.
Okay, so this table really gets to the heart of the disagreement that would tear the left apart for the next 150 years. On one side, you have Marx. He says, look, to get to socialism, you have to seize the state. You have to create what he called a dictatorship of the proletariat, basically a government run by and for the working class. It's a necessary step. But then you have Bakunin, and he's like, no. The state is the problem. It doesn't matter who's in charge. He basically predicted that if Marx's guys took over, they'd just become the new tyrants. For Bakunin, the only answer was to smash the state completely.
In that clash of ideas, do you use the state or do you destroy it? Do you build a centralized party or do you rely on a spontaneous uprising? That whole debate was born right there, in the ashes of the 1848 revolutions. It's a fault line that runs right through the 20th century, shaping everything from the Russian Revolution to the Cold War, and it's still with us today. Which brings us back to the big question, right? Why do these ideas, forged in the smoke-filled factories of the 19th century, still have such a powerful grip on our world today?